What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at the anniversary update for Avowed via an early preview provided by Obsidian roughly around the beginning of February. Now you guys are seeing this roughly a week before the update itself launches on February 17th, which is the game's actual anniversary. Now I've been following along with Avowed since well before its actual release, of course, and while we're going to talk about some of those updates since the game's launch, our primary focus here is of course the anniversary update, and it is by far the game's largest update, this one bringing new playable races, bringing it pretty much up to par with the first two Pillars games, which of course share the setting, a fully fleshed out New Game Plus mode, alongside plenty of other customization options and things to talk about along the way. So quite a bit to get to here, but also worth a mention that I believe this is coming alongside the game launching on PlayStation 5, as well as a reduction in base game price, bringing it down to $50 US. Now from here, I'm largely going to split this video up into two sections, which should be timestamped down below if you would like to jump around, but first we're going to talk about the updates that have led up to this point, and then we'll talk about the anniversary update itself and kind of wrap up with my overall thoughts. Kicking it off from there, however, our first update actually came in March of 2025. This was mostly community requested features as well as a little change to progression that many people had been asking for, so a lot of quality of life stuff here. This includes things like a toggle for walking and running, the option to have the compass be static, a toggle for the heads-up display, adding an FOV slider to the third-person mode of the game, as well as fully allowing customizable keybinds. However, outside of those quality of life things, this first update actually did also add something really important, which was that you gained an additional talent point, or skill point if you will, every 5 levels starting at level 5. This means that you are able to pick up more skills and abilities, which allowed you to of course diversify your character quite a bit more, which is even more so now in New Game Plus, which we'll get to. Following on from that, then in May of 2025, there were a few other important changes here. So they changed how the Fog of War worked so that you would actually clear the Fog of War from a map once you were done, and also allowed the increased radius of clearing the Fog of War, if that's the kind of thing that bothers you. The game also has a day-night cycle, if you didn't know. However, you would probably not see nighttime too much prior to this update, which is simply because when you would exit the party camp, it would just sort of reset it to day, whereas with this update, whenever you left the camp, you could choose whether it would be day or night. There were also a couple of quality of life improvements, such as adding chests to the mini-map, alongside the ability to cancel power attacks for the bow and the arquebus. And then there was some world interactivity added here as well. For instance, hitting water would cause a splash effect, and then arrows became fully part of the world, so when you shot them, they weren't just like a thing that didn't really exist physically, but now they would get stuck in things, fall, that kind of stuff, in an effort to make the world feel a little more reactive where they could. This update also made some changes to companions, however. It gave them more talent points, so as they leveled up, every 3 levels from the initial 4, they now got an extra point, which meant they could have more of their abilities unlocked overall, and while you still couldn't get all of them, they were just more useful as a result. Now, alongside this, they actually made Yachtley a little less required because she had the Dispel Illusions ability. And prior to this update, she was the only person who could use it, and so they added the Dispel Illusions ability to one of the throwable grenades you get, called a Forgotten Soul Pod, and now the only time you have to have Yachtley with you is for a single quest where she is the one who has to dispel the illusion. That then brings us to our last prior update, the Summer Update. This update was really all about expanding out the ability trees. On launch, both Fighter and Ranger were a little thin compared to being a wizard. This update added 7 abilities to the Ranger tree, as well as 8 abilities to the Fighter tree, which will of course allow more build options and different ways to play the game. For the Ranger, this included things like Shadow Step, Fan of Daggers, Smoke Bomb, a Frost Trap, stuff like that. Most of that is pretty much exactly what you would expect. And then there were also Fighter abilities added, such as Driving Kick, which if fully upgraded is like this big explosive kick you can do to enemies, which was fun. Barbaric Smash could potentially kill enemies and transfer the stun from that enemy you just killed to a new enemy, which will be important here in a moment. The ability to recover all of their stamina, revive enemies, get a talent for dual wielding, increase damage at low health levels, things like that. So all around just more useful overall. And to coincide with some of that extra build diversity, they also added new unique items with that update that allowed you to do more with those things. And then finally, some more quality of life with this update, which included the cooking UI, making it a little easier to read overall, but also adding a note about whether or not you had cooked it before, which helped with one of the achievements, which was kind of annoying prior to this. So that's been our previous updates. But for our anniversary updates specifically, we have quite a bit more to talk about. Starting with, of course, the biggest stuff. We've got the new playable races, the Dwarves, Orlans, and Amawa. Now, these guys, in addition to the human and elf that have always been available, basically completes what would have been available for this game in terms of playable races across the board. The only other playable race you are already a member of, which are the godlike. You being a godlike is central to the game's story, and so the specific type of godlike you are, which would have typically been customizable in the Pillars games, isn't present here because it just wouldn't be possible. But this does mean you can fully play all the races of the Pillars series that would have been available to you otherwise, outside of course, like specific sub-race choices, that kind of thing. However, while this is interesting in and of itself, it is also not a purely cosmetic choice either. The different races get different attribute bonuses, which would normally go up to their cap of 15 in the base game, but with New Game Plus, that's actually changed as well. But before we get into that, not only are there new playable races, but there's also a whole bunch of new customization options to go with it. If you don't want to mess around with the game's character creator, you can also choose from a relatively large list of preset characters, if you just want to choose one and get going. But assuming you do want to customize your character, you'll find a lot more options, especially around the godlike's ability to change the growths on their face, and as always you can choose to hide those, though it doesn't make you any less of a godlike in-game, by the way, just so you're aware and don't want to look too crazy. In addition to those extra godlike features, there are of course different options for the different new races here now, such as the Amawa or Orlans, who look radically different from humans and elves, as an example. So overall, that's definitely fun to see and probably good news to most people, I would imagine. But we are not done yet, because let's say you've already beaten the game and you're looking for an excuse to play it again, and that's going to come in the form of new difficulty options, a new weapon, and potentially New Game Plus. Now, I did personally find the difficulty options to be a little bit hidden, so you still have your presets, normal, hard, Path of the Damned, things like that, but once you are actually in the game, if you go to the game setting options where you would normally find difficulty, if you either scroll to the bottom of that page, or you set the game to custom difficulty and then scroll to the bottom of it, you'll find the different modifiers for the difficulties. This lets you affect all sorts of things, like, giving yourself increased health, stamina, increased damage taken or given, what all enemies have going on, that type of thing, allowing you to make the game easier or harder as you go. What's more though, if you choose to make the game more difficult, you can actually give yourself an extra XP boost at the same time. So in addition to taking on more of a challenge, you'll actually level up faster as a result of taking on that challenge, which is a nice little incentive for people, I would imagine. And I would also imagine probably the best place to mess around with that is in fact the game's New Game Plus feature. So I did want to point out that even if you've beat the game previously, it does look like, at least from this preview I had, that you need to run back through the ending of the game real quick in order to actually unlock it for that save file. Otherwise though, what New Game Plus actually does and affects is pretty interesting. So you are reset to level 1, but the catch is you actually retain all of your ability and attribute points that you've gained over the course of your previous playthrough. You're also going to take all of your unique weapons and equipment with you. But the reason they reset your level is because they have actually also increased the cap for both your abilities as well as the attributes for New Game Plus. So whereas the attribute cap was 15, regardless of how you arrived there in the base game, it is now 30 in New Game Plus, meaning that you will be able to apply and stack more of the bonuses to make those stronger, which you're probably going to need because NPCs will have increased stats accordingly as well. That is to say, enemies that you'll be fighting. On the flip side of that though, there is some stuff that does not carry over, which mainly includes all of the non-unique things you are using, but also pretty much all of your resources as well. So definitely something you need to be aware of. However, on top of that, I did also notice that the upgrades you put on your unique weapons and armor, which could be upgraded and improved as you you went basically are also removed. But believe it or not, that is not all, because let's say you don't necessarily want to play through the game again as the character that you have already made and you would like to check out some of the new races and customization options. Well, you're able to. You can either choose to go through New Game Plus as the character you have already completed it as, or when you hit New Game Plus, you can actually make a new character to play through as instead. And if that's not enough for you, there is actually something else that caters to that indecisiveness. As with the anniversary update, it looks like you will find a mirror in your camp from now on that allows you to alter your appearance pretty much at will, which also included the ability to like change your race and stuff. So all of that, on top of the fact that the new character creation also lets you pick a new background for this character as well, means that you can experience more of the game's options and changes, etc. via this system, while also keeping your progression along the way. And all of that stuff, combined with the new races, is I think easily the most exciting thing about this particular update, and I think if you really enjoy Pillars of Eternity, this is pretty great news across the board. But still a few other things to go over as well. There is a new photo mode. Say you want to take a picture of your newly freshly minted character, you are certainly welcome to do so. Photo mode seems to have all the usual bells and whistles you would associate with that kind of thing. Filters, free cams, the ability to hide things, that sort of stuff. Still a few other things to go, however. So they've also reworked conversations and lighting with this update, and I don't have an exact list of every conversation that they changed or did things with, but you can absolutely see in some of the conversations they are certainly a bit more, I would say, expressive with how the characters move, things like that. You can definitely tell they gave a pass to it. So that was actually a pretty big change, but there's also a host of smaller changes, like for instance, they've added workbenches throughout the world. This is an area or a station you can go to that looks like a little anvil to basically just access the crafting bench to upgrade your gear without necessarily going to camp, for example, which is going to help you do things like avoid loading screens. But they've also, with this update, caused certain enemy encounters to actually start respawning, meaning that the world won't feel necessarily empty once you've more or less wiped it clean. There are things to go back and refight if you want to, which is probably a pretty good time to test out the new weapon that was added with this particular update as well. So as of the anniversary update, you'll be able to play with the quarterstaff. Now, I did a little investigation into this because I was like, it's one thing to just add a weapon that is cosmetically different from others, but if you're just swinging a quarterstaff in a first person in a game like this, that isn't necessarily exciting. So where does this weapon sort of fit in the grand scheme of things? Well, it basically looks like it is a lower stamina cost two-handed melee weapon, meaning that it's probably a pretty good option if you want to play a wizard primarily that is going to be up close and personal with enemies, as there are sort of more melee-oriented options for that kind of thing. But with the way attributes are spread out, if you're playing a wizard normally, you might not necessarily be investing a lot into a stamina build, as an example. So it looks like the quarterstaff is going to have a lower stamina cost at the cost of a slightly reduced bit of damage and stun in comparison to other two-handed weapons, which would make it more viable for a character that doesn't have a lot of stamina to still get the benefit of the higher stun that is typically associated with two-handed weapons. So that seems to be where it sort of fits in on a build level. However, that also begs the question, like when you're picking your abilities, what all actually affects the quarterstaff? Now, the quarterstaff seems to just kind of be generically labeled as a two-handed melee weapon. Lucky for us, there's a very easy ability to grab that just increases the damage of two-handed melee weapons broadly. The abilities that won't work, however, are the ones that specify an axe or a sword as an example. A staff is neither of those. It also didn't seem to work with the ability that increased maces and hammers' ability to stun enemies, so that's something to know. But every other ability is worded in such a way that it's pretty obvious whether or not this would be affected, but I did want to mention those specifically because I did a little bit of testing with them. And it does look like if you want to use this, the primary ability to increase your damage with it is just going to be the two-handed melee ability. And as far as updates go, I think that is all of the most important stuff to know, which brings me to my own thoughts on it. So overall, I would say this is a very good update. It adds a lot of stuff that I know people have been asking for, such as, mainly, I would say, the playable races from Pillars, the Orlands and the Amawa, especially, for me at least. New Game Plus and how it is implemented here seems especially interesting to me because I think it incentivizes you to actually use it and enjoy some of that continued progression while also just straight up being able to either change your character or pick a different background to see different content as you go, which will hopefully encourage people, if they want to use New Game Plus, to also enjoy some of the differences between those playthroughs. And I think a lot of this stuff, like the new weapon especially, but also the new races, in combination with previous updates that added all the extra skills and everything, I think adds some desperately needed build diversity to the previously kind of scarce fighter and ranger options. And I think all of that stuff in combination with lowering the base game's price to $50 US will hopefully encourage more people to check it out, outside of people like myself who simply love the world of Eora at large. However, I do want to point out that at least as of yet, we don't know if this is going to be the last Avowed update or not, but there are still some things that have not been addressed up to this point that I think are likely going to be the things that continue to bother people moving forward, especially the lack of things like world interactivity, which is a big part of people's main complaints at large. There isn't really a theft system. You can go around sort of hoovering everything up. NPCs mostly stay static where they are and don't move around too much, and those are immersive elements that people have been asking for that honestly, I don't think are simple things to add and aren't likely to get added. And so if you're looking to get into Avowed, whether it be on PlayStation or just to check out all of these changes, I hope that this video kind of gave you an idea about what it is and what it isn't, following, of course, its initial release. So that, I think, is pretty much where I'm going to leave it. I think this was, in a vacuum, a great update in and of itself, but I think in combination with the other updates they've made along the way, Avowed has had some great improvements. Some of the stuff I directly mentioned in my original review, such as some of the build variety stuff. However, I do want to make it clear that if you were expecting monumental changes outside of like the playable races and stuff to like the fundamental structure of the game, that has not happened, and nor should you expect it going into this. But that is where I'm going to wrap up this particular video. So again, hopefully you enjoyed all of that. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.